This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so we are here. We basically went ahead and created an Azure DevOps organization yesterday, and we were looking at a couple of things like what really DevOps practices are, and how the industry changed from, let's say, a waterfall model to, let's say, an agile methodology of development. And now basically we were looking at where DevOps really comes into picture, and we were also looking at what is a conventional DevOps, and let's say what exactly an Azure DevOps really is. And then basically we said, okay, fine, this is how the Azure DevOps really looks like. And after creating an organization, we went ahead and created a project. Like, we had a button like something like this, and we created a private project, meaning this is not a public project. Not everyone can just come and visit your code just like that. This is a private project. Now the question is that, even before we begin with, let's say, the understanding of what a project is and what exactly is it, what exactly is into it, what exactly goes into it, you will have to understand that if you, let's say, have about a lot of users in your organization, then how do you add them? Like here in Azure portal, we went into the Active Directory and we added the users, right? In the same way, if let's say you are using an Azure cloud, okay, and you have a lot of users basically that you already have defined in the Azure portal, you can integrate the Azure Active Directory with Azure DevOps, and all those settings would be under something known as the organization settings out here. So organization settings, this one I'm talking about, the organization settings out here, this would basically have a lot of things like, let's say, adding users, adding roles, and a lot of things out there. So this is something that we'll be using a lot. So organization settings, and under organization setting, let's say if you already have Active Directory, this is the option basically where you can go ahead and integrate your Active Directory. You can just say connect with your Active Directory, and everything gets synced. Like all the users basically that you have in your Azure Active Directory kind of gets synced with, let's say, your Azure DevOps organization. Or let's say if you want to add users, okay, you'll have to just come here. And for now, I just have one user in this particular entire organization. All you need to do is just say add users. And let's say test123@gmail.com. Let's imagine this is, let's say, one ideal user out there. And here you can define the level of access. Ideally you will have like these three levels of access out here, and what each and every level gives, we'll look at it. But for now, let's go for a basic access level. And you can basically also add the user to all the projects basically that are defined inside your organization. Inside my organization, there's only one project right now, which is like something like this. You can add and you can give a specific role to the user: reader, contributor, administrator. The same three things that we've seen in RBAC basically in the Azure portal. Reader only can read, contributor can do a limited stuff, administrator can do a lot of things out here. So this is how you basically go ahead and add a user. So again, organization settings, users, and then add a user. So you can have multiple users with multiple logins and etc. And again, how many users you can add, what is the charge, everything depends upon the licensing basically that you're kind of going for. And for me, in my case, I am using a basic license, so I can add like about 5 users basically initially to begin with. And after that, each and every user is somewhere around 400 rupees per month. That's how the licensing really works out here in Azure DevOps. And here you can come down and you can click on projects. You can see basically all the projects basically that are listed in your organization. You can delete your projects and do all that stuff out here. This is what the organization setting really has out here. Like, there are a lot of things out here. Again, we'll look into what these are and etc. But guys, the first thing that you guys want to do is, after creating an organization, is this is the link of the organization. Okay, so make sure to do this, because this is kind of very important right now. Now, this is the link of your organization. Take this link out. I mean, you have a project out here which is called, create a project, and take this link out and go to this form. Okay, I'll send the link in the chat, so please keep it handy. Please go to this form. the first thing you people want to do is please go to this form, enter your name, enter the email ID that you kind of registered with Azure DevOps, enter the link to your organization, which is this one, the entire thing clear, and say that it's a private, and then submit. That's it. Now, why do you want to do this? What is this? I'll let you all know when the time really comes out there. But your name, your email ID with which you are registered with Azure DevOps, and then the name of, I mean, the link to your organization, and then your organization being private. Okay, because we are creating private projects out here, so the organization being private, and then give a submit out here. Now, this is called a parallelism and all that stuff. We will look into what that is and etc. Right now, it is like too early to explain what parallelism is, but this doing this, it'll take about 2 to 3 days for Azure DevOps to process all your requests out here. They wouldn't charge anything as such. Like, this is something that they have introduced of late very recently. So please submit this out. This will help us out in the classes that are coming in the future. I'll explain why we have done this and all that stuff. So users and all, we are like good. You've added the users. Now you want to work with your project. Now basically want to work with your project, and you click onto your project and you quit inside your project. The first thing that you want to do is, I am concerned about my code, right? The first thing that I want to do is code. My code basically, or the code which the developer is writing, is sitting on his local laptop. The code is sitting on his local machine. Now I want to make sure this code is basically kept in a safe place, like a repository in our case. And what we are using right now is a Git repository or an Azure repos. When you basically come here, it's a Git repository or an Azure repos. So I want to make sure that I host all this code on the cloud. Firstly, why do I want to host it? So that I can promote an environment of collaborative effort. I can promote an environment of, let's say, team effort. Secondly, I can also maintain the security of my code. And we've also seen how you can version your code, meaning the history of your code and etc. So in order for your developer to do this, or to upload the code, let's say, into the cloud, you need something known as a repository. In my case, this is a Git repository that I need. So what I need to do is, I need to initialize a Git repository. I don't have a Git repository right now, and I need to initialize a Git repository in Azure DevOps. How do I do it? Just come here, click on files. It will say, hey, you know what? You do not have a repository. Like, I am going to give you a name of a repository as such. This is the name of your repository, same as the name of your project. You can create a different name also. That is, I mean, nothing is going to stop you. But this is the name of the repository that I'm actually going to give you. So are you good with this? When we say, okay, great, this is fine. I'll go ahead and say, okay, fine. Initialize a repository. I'll just come down and I'll say, okay, fine, initialize. As in, when I do an initialization of my repository kind of gets into the picture, or kind of gets alive. Now here is where my repository concepts come into picture. So I now have a repository out here. Okay, I have a repository, and repository works in the form of something known as branches. Repositories work in something called branches out here. What do I mean by a branch, or what exactly is a branch as such? Now, this now, right, would be a main repository out here, and this repository will be used by a lot of people, a lot of developers, a lot of people together. Now, how would I make sure that I don't override my changes with my fellow teammates changes. It's that, wouldn't it be good enough to go ahead and, let's say, have the same repository but different partitions in the repository? That's where your branch comes into picture. Branches give you a way in isolating different things on your repository. Meaning, let's say I am working on something, okay? I am working on, let's say, this particular file, which is like readme.md file, something like this. I want to make sure that my work is isolated and my work doesn't affect anyone else. Like I'm testing something, I want to do something, so I don't want my work to be affecting someone else. So what I would say is that, okay, fine, I will go and use a concept called as branch. This one. This one is something that I'm talking about. I want to use a concept called as branch. I would say go to branches. Right now, by default, Git works in the form of branches. By default, you will be given something known as a main branch out here. Okay. I would say a new branch, and I will call my branch a test branch based on main branch because I need a parent branch from which where I can work from. I can say create. Now this is my test branch where I can go ahead and I can start creating my own changes. And I can basically, do all these changes and all that stuff. I can have things out here, and I can make sure that I have my own isolated world out here in the same repository, maintaining all my changes on the cloud and making sure that what my work is protected out here. Now this is the basic purpose of a branch, but there are a lot of things like branching policies, branching, merging strategies, and etc., which we'll be learning today, which we'll be looking into great detail today. So I'll just delete this branch out here. So again, I'm back to my main branch out here. Now again, the question is, I have my code here in my local machine. How do I upload my code? How do I make all these changes out here? For which you need to basically understand a few terminologies that are related to Git, because we are working with a Git repository. Azure repos is nothing but a Git repository out here. So since that you're working with a Git repository out here, we need to understand few terminologies of what Git really means out here. Okay. And the first thing that I want to do is, like, I just want to take through a couple of Git commands or a couple of Git actions basically that we'll be doing in this particular class. The first of many is something known as a Git clone. Git clone. Now, what do you mean by a Git clone? Is very simple. If you have a repository in the cloud, and if you're trying to download this entire repository to your local machine, this is known as a Git clone. So you have a cloud, you're just downloading your entire cloud, or you have a repository on the cloud, you're just downloading the entire repository to your local machine. This is just known as a clone operation or a Git clone operation. Now you have commands for this also. Now if you say git clone command in the internet, you'll get basically the commands basically that you can use to clone your entire repository. But nowadays there is a lot of basically automation that is going on. You have a lot of IDs like Visual Studio Code which is supporting all the clone and etc. So not I mean, you don't really have to use a command to get it done. Like if you know a command, very good, not a problem. Like this is especially from this is especially for someone who's coming from a Linux administration. Like they do not have the IDs and etc that much, so they can basically go ahead and clone the repository and do all that stuff. But for a Windows background, especially, you don't really need a lot of commands out here. So I have a repository out here. I want to make sure that I clone this repository into my local machine right now. Now, the first thing that I need to do, guys, is that in order to make sure you perform all these operations, your laptop should, or your computer, or the operating system that is running on your computer should also be able to understand these commands. So you need a compiler in between your command and between what you're doing. Your OS needs something known as a compiler, for which you need to download something known as Git. Just say Git for Windows. So very simple software. Just hit a download here. That's it. Download. Just do a next and install this out. Like a very simple software. Looks something like this after getting downloaded. Looks, it has a Git bash, Git UI, and all that stuff. It looks something like this after getting downloaded. So it's a very simple, plain, basic software. So download and just the basic installation. And the version that you're downloading is a 2.33.0.2 or something, and something like this. You just download this out and have it installed on your local machine. And after having it installed, what you want to do is like come down to your Azure repository, go into the branch. This is something that I want to make sure I clone to my local machine. I say clone. So here's a button called clone, and I want to clone in VS Code. This supports a lot of things out here. Like you have PyCharm, you have RubyMine, all these are IDs, and I have a VS Code. Visual Studio also is on the offer. So a lot of things out here, but since we already have, we already know how to use Visual Studio Code, I'll just say, okay, fine, clone in VS Code. It says, okay, fine, open this out. I'll say open. I'll say open. And now it's telling me, you know what? Can you choose a folder where you want to download it? Like, can you choose, let's say, or can you tell me in which folder do you want to basically download this entire, repository out here? Now I'll say, okay, fine, I'll do a new, thing out here. Like I'll say a new folder. I'll say first repo, and I'll say this is the folder location for my, repository. Select this out. And what it's trying to now do is that it's trying to basically go to the source, meaning which is like the Azure DevOps repository, and it's trying to basically establish a connection between the Azure DevOps repository and my local machine out here. And since I'm already signed into it, it said, okay, fine, I will clone it. And I'll say, okay, fine, open. As in when I cloned it, it said, okay, fine, you know what, this is the project. And this is, let's say, the README file that you have in your project. Like this is all basically that you have, a README file and all that stuff, which is now great. Now, what my developer wants to do is, or basically what I want to do right now, is I want to basically upload all my code that is there on my local machine into this particular project, right? Because that's the reason I basically went ahead and downloaded it, or that's the reason I basically went ahead and cloned it. Okay, so we'll have to start using specific terms out here for Git. And now I'm saying I am cloning this out. Okay, I am saying now I am cloning this out. And now what I want to do right now is I want to now do a Git push. A Git push, or in our terminology, in a layman's terminology, uploading your code from your local machine to, let's say, the remote Git repository. So again, you have a laptop, you have a Git repository out here. Now the direction is different. You are now trying to upload the code from your local machine to the remote Git repository out here. And when you're trying to do this, like from your local to the remote Git repository, it's known as a Git push. So when you're trying to download it, it's called Git clone. You're cloning a repository into your local machine. When you're trying to send back the code, it is called a Git push. Okay, so two commands, Git clone, Git push. So how do I really push? what are the operations that are involved in a push out here. So what do I do now is that firstly I'll, let's say, open a code that I have. So I have, like, a lot of code basically in my local machine. So I'll basically just go into, let's say, my local machine out here, and I'll just go into, let's say, the C drive, and let's open a code out here. Here is my source and repos, and then let's say ASP.NET Core project, like one of the, a very simple project basically that I do have out here. So what I want to do is I want to basically make sure that I copy all this, the entire folder out here. So I'm just copying my folder, and I want to open the location of this particular folder. Let's see, where is the file? Okay. I'll just say, just copy the relative path out here, or let's say also you can say reveal in file explorer. So this will open up, let's say, this particular project. So this is the test project, and you just have a readme file out here. And what I want to do is I'll just paste it out here. I'll just paste my entire code that I had, the entire folder that I had, into this particular path out here. That's it. And when I do this, it says, what? Yes, you have a folder out here with, a couple of changes out here. Like, you have all these things basically that you're, sending out right now. And now Git says this is something that you have to look at. Now Git is now telling you that you have 211 changes, meaning your local machine has 211 changes that are ready to be pushed to the remote Git repository. This is basically an option basically which gets highlighted as in when you do any change out there. Okay, so I can click on this and say, what, these are all the changes. It says, what, these are all the changes basically that are in the folder. It's highlighting each and every file basically out there, and it says, what, these are all the changes. Are you ready to go ahead and do a git commit? This is the second command. I mean, this is the third command what we'll be looking at today. Is called a git commit. Now git commit is making sure that you manifest your changes onto a repository, or you just make some changes onto a repository. Meaning first you did a clone, you basically took all that files and put it in the in that particular folder path, and now you want to make sure to commit your changes. For this, you need to basically make sure to use something known as a git commit. How do you do that? How do I use a git commit out here? Now these are all the changes, 211 changes, and it now tells you individual file changes also. Now if you are coming from a development background, let's say you are working with, let's say, the first 500 files out here, or let's say you are working with first, until here, until this particular file you're working till here. Okay, and you want to make sure that only these changes go into, let's say, the repository. Everything below it doesn't go. I still want to, really work on it. Will you get an option? Yes, you get an option. All the files that you want to basically commit to your repository, you have something known as a staging area. So you have a repository, and even before you do a commit onto your repository, you need to stage your changes. What do I mean by stage your changes is that you need to decide what are the files you are going to commit to your repository. So stage your changes. Staging the change just means what files are you really going to go ahead and, let's say, commit to the repository. How do you do a stage? Just click on the button here it would just do a stage, meaning it will basically put all this changes into something known as a staging area, so that you can commit this particular changes into your Git repository. How do I do it? For example, if you click on this particular file, right, only this particular file will be a staged change. But I don't want to do that. I want to, this is the entire code that I have. I want to basically commit everything. Can I do everything? Can I click, do I have to click, one after the other? It will be a tedious task, right, to click one after the other. So that's the reason you have something called stage all changes. As in when I click it, it now says, you know what? I will stage everything that is there, or all the changes basically that you are telling me. And now it's telling me, you know what? The staged changes are 211. Can you remove something from it? Yes, you can just do a minus. So a plus and a minus, stage and unstage. Now all these changes are ready to be what? To be committed. To be committed where? Onto your repository. Now I'll say, okay, fine. I'll enter something known as a commit message. I'll say, this is my first commit. And I'll say commit. Very simple. I went here and I said commit. That's it. Now what it did, now you see the changes are 0. Meaning now your local machine has all the changes that you have done, and all the changes are now committed where? To your local machine, not to the repository yet. Now Git has a tendency to maintain all these changes in your local machine as well. Now if I go into this particular project and let's say see, you see this, right? When I do a hidden type, it says, you know what, it's called a .git folder. This gets initiated as in when you do a git clone. What does Git do is that Git maintains a history of changes that you have done even on your local machine, so that you can work offline and take all your changes at one go. So what you did when you did a commit out here is that you committed all these changes into, let's say, the Git staging area, or into, let's say, the Git database on your local machine. So all these changes are now there in your local machine. Now what I want to do is I want to push all this change. Now here is where git push comes into picture. So git commands, I did a git clone. Then I basically did I basically took all the files that I want to go into my repository, and I said okay fine. I pasted all that file into the folder where git basically provisioned me something, and I went ahead and I said stage my change, and then I did a commit, and my changes are committed where? To the local machine out here. This is not still pushed to the cloud. I haven't pushed it to the cloud. My changes are committed in the local machine, and Git now has, let's say, the history of all the commits that I made to my local. Now what I'll do is I'll come down to my IDE, which is Visual Studio Code, and I will say, okay, fine, click on these three dots out here, and I'll say push. Now what it's gonna do very simply is that it will push it back. It will push it back to the remote repository from where all these changes were cloned out. So what's going to happen now is that you now just see a readme file out here. But if I refresh it out, now you see you have the ASP.NET Core project basically that we just pushed from my local machine, and it says, you know what, this is my first commit and all that stuff. And since basically I'm using multiple accounts in the Visual Studio Code, it's just giving a name out here. But let's say this, if you give a different name out here, you'll basically see a commit along with this particular name. So isn't this the message what I gave? And this is how my commit history is being tracked. It's saying, you know what, these are all the files basically that you kind of pushed out here, And this is how the commit really looks like. This is how really the commit all looks like. And now your changes are manifested over the cloud. Meaning all the changes or all the code basically that my developer has been working till now is being now pushed back into, let's say, the cloud. So again, quick recap. We had a repository just with a readme.md file. We cloned it. We just copied our code basically from our local machine into, let's say, that particular folder and did a git commit. And when you did a git commit, you stage all your changes and commit your changes to a local machine and then do a git push. And your git push basically will initiate an upload of the code or a push of the code from a local machine to a remote git repository from where you have cloned the code back again or on which you are really working on. So these are a few commands that you'll need to basically have an understanding. Now you can also basically type in these commands. Like when you do a when you download a git, you will basically have a git bash basically where you can go ahead and type in your all your commands and etc. like git clone and all that stuff. You can do this, or you can. I find it very easier to go ahead and use an IDE. Typing as an option or basically remembering all these commands is, let's say, the an option or it's a mandate when you are working with a Linux based interface. But when you're working with a Windows based interface, no one really cares whether you're typing it or not. All you need is all you need is that job to be getting done. In my case, yes, it is getting done. I'm doing everything basically that I can type. I'm just using an IDE so that it's easy for me to just go ahead and make my job done. So this is how you can go ahead and use all these commands using something known as Visual Studio Code. You can also do this with a Visual Studio, like nothing stopping you from doing that. So you can also use this with the Visual Studio out there. So if I go into my branches, if I clone this out, I can also use an IDE like Visual Studio and also clone my entire changes out there. So anything which is comfortable with you, you can start using that particular ID in order to do all the skit operations out here. So any questions till now, guys?
Could you please put the code in the GitHub so that we can use this?
Which code? I'm sorry. Oh, this code. Okay, this is a very like a boilerplate
Automation.
code. This one, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
just like I just like developed a boilerplate code basically from this one. But you can also use a SQL project basically that we had. Like even the SQL project code basically that is there in the GitHub, right? You can also
Yeah.
make use of it.
Okay.
So you can also make use of it, or if you want this, I'll also put this out there. Like I'll after this class, I'll upload it into that particular repository. But this can be I just developed it using the Visual Studio, so just a boilerplate ASP.NET web application, and this is like the basic code basically that comes out of it. So I just took that. But if you want this out, like you can also do ASP.NET. Come on, .NET Core GitHub, and you can just download the entire code from here also. Like you have the entire code from here also, so you can also download here. You have, let's say, the ASP.NET, the entire thing out there available. Like you can do a sample code out here. And you can get it online also. But if you want me to, I'll just go ahead and upload it in the Git repository. That's not a problem at all. So any more questions in this, guys?
Cannot we do without staging? Just we can directly push the code.
No, you cannot do it without staging. You'll have to stage your changes before you push it out. Yes, first you'll have to stage your changes for Git to understand what changes needs to be pushed out, and only then you can push your changes out. Any more questions?
Will developer upload the code and then we need to do it, or they will give the code to us? We need to upload.
It depends again. See, again, all these operations are done by the developers. Like all the code basically is uploaded into the repository by the developers it's themselves, and after they upload the code is when where we come into picture. But just in case if let's say the developers not doing it, I mean generally the developers would do it. Like 99% of the times the developers would do it because that's the easiest way to just push the code and all. But even we will be doing these uploads. Even as a DevOps engineer, even I'll be doing all this pushes and all, but I'll push my ARM templates and etc. that I write. Even that needs to be version control, right? So I'll push my ARM templates and etc. into that.
Okay.
Mhm. Now, any more questions, guys?
After we did the git clone, we have created a dot git in our local machine, right? So
Right.
how can we use this?
The on your local machine.
Yeah, dot git.
So what happens is that this is, let's say, a complete database that Git maintains to understand and to track things out. Now, in order to do that, you'll have to basically switch down to a command line interface, like something like CMD or something like that in order to use this. I'll also show you how that that's done in a local and all. Like I'll also basically take a session and on doing the commands and let's say using the CMD for your command line interface and maintaining your local Git.
Okay.
Any more questions on this, guys? Okay. Now, one most important thing that I need to do even before I push, I do all that stuff is that this is the main branch where I'm really working on. Okay, this is like the main branch where I'm really working on. But when you are working, let's say with an organization as such, you cannot directly push the code onto the main branch. You're not supposed to push the code onto the main branch. Reason being, this is the branch what you're maintaining. This is the branch basically where you're maintaining all your code, and later you want to build your code out of this branch and then deploy the same code onto various environments. So I am not supposed to directly go ahead and commit my code into it or commit my changes into it. The reason being, if my changes are not properly tested, if I am not testing my changes properly on the local and directly pushing it across, there might be a chances that I might corrupt the entire repository. There might be a chances that I might go ahead and let's say corrupt the entire repository out here. That is the reason every organization follows something called as a branching strategy. Very, very, very important, guys. Very frequently asked interview question. What kind of a branching strategy have you really followed in your project? What kind of a branching policy that have you really, kind of followed on your project? How is your branching strategy and all that stuff? Meaning, how do you maintain or what do you do to maintain the life cycle of your branch? For which I'll need to just tell again, we'll just need to talk about the the development life cycle we were talking about yesterday. We just need to again revisit the software development life cycle that we were doing yesterday. Now, what happens typically is something like this. You have a Git repository, which is great. You have a branch called a main branch. Like now they are calling it as main. Earlier it was a master. So a main or a master refers to the same thing. Like a lot of organizations even use a terminology called as a master branch out there. Okay, master branch should always hold the code that went into production, meaning you basically hold this code for a particular reason. and you deploy that code basically into production, right? Master branch should always hold the code that is going into production. And for the developers to work with, developers should not work directly on the master branch. Master branch should always have the code that went into production, meaning master branch is like a backup. So I don't want anyone to go ahead and make any kind of commits onto my master branch. I only want my master branch to hold this code. So for my developers to play around, I do a git pull. Now I'm using a terminology called git pull, meaning creating a new branch from an existing branch is called a git pull. From this particular branch, I create another branch called develop branch. Let's use this as, I call something on as a develop branch out here. Develop branch is for my developers to commit their changes. But is it okay if they directly commit? No, it's not okay for me to directly, for ask my developers to directly commit onto, let's say, the develop branch, because even this is a branch which is there on the cloud, which I want to make sure that it is always, bug free. It does not have any vulnerabilities and etc. For which I ask my developers to pull their own branches from the develop. I ask my developers to pull their own branch from the develop, and such branches that are pulled from the develop are called feature branches. There can be multiple feature branches depending upon the number of developers you have and all that stuff. And I want my developers to, let's say, always do a feature commit onto the develop branch. I always want my developers to do a feature commit, meaning I always want them to approach using something known as a feature branch out there. So the first thing a developer does is pulls a feature branch. So let's do that. I have a main branch. I don't want to use this branch. So I'll say I want a develop branch out of it. From the main, I don't now want any one of my developers to go ahead and do a direct commit on top of it. What can I do? I can just send out an email telling that, hey, you know what, don't do this. But again, we're all human beings, so there might be errors. Someone would have not, checked that email. They can basically go ahead and by mistake, commit onto this, because I want to avoid all these things. So what I'll do is that come here to say more options. I lock this branch. This is a branch lock. Can only be done by project administrators. Now I cannot do a commit on top of this branch. Commits are not allowed on top of this branch. They are done. Now there is also a condition that I want to allow commits on the develop branch, but not directly, but using something known as a feature branch out here. Meaning I want to protect my branch. I want to always make sure to protect my branch out here. So what I'll try to do here is that I'll implement something known as branching policy. This is known as, guys, as branching policies, which is used to protect your branch. So what kind of branching policies, or how do you apply your branching policies? Again, more options. Click on branch policies. It will now take you to a page where you can go ahead and implement, your branch policies out there. And these are all your branch policies. And I'll say anything that gets into my branch should require a minimum number of, let's say, one reviewer in my case, because I am the only user. Basically, there's only one user in my entire organization, but you can have this as 2, 3, something like that. Usually 1 or 2 basically is the standard convention pattern. And this option is usually not checked, guys. Allow requester to approve their own change. But in my case, I am checking this out because I am the only user again, and I am basically requesting my changes to be entered into the developed. So I'll say allow this out. Checked for link work items, checks for command resolution. We'll see what these all are. We'll see basically, how these all are, and then limit merge types and etc. But for now, I'm protecting my branch using a policy called require a minimum number of reviewers. And as and when I go back, right, do you see this badge that came onto the develop branch? This means that your branch has policies. This means that your branch cannot be used for direct commits. And I want to directly commit onto the develop. Pushes to the branch are not permitted. You must make use of a pull request to update this particular branch, meaning I won't let you commit on top of this branch because you have something known as branching policies on top of it, meaning your branch is now protected. This is how I will discourage my developers to directly make commits on the develop branch. But I will give my developers an option to go ahead and pull a branch out of it. I will say, okay, fine, feature, and just do, let's say, the ID of the developer. Let's say something like XYZ hyphen the feature he's working on. Let's say a button. And I will say, okay, fine. This is based out of what? Develop branch right now. And I'll say create. Now I have a branch called XYZ something like button on something like this. And I can now make use of this particular branch for my developments. I can make use of this particular branch for my developments, and this particular branch, right? How do I commit changes to it? How do I, let's say, push changes to this particular branch as such? Now, all I'll do is I have something known, let's see, branches, merge branch, not this one. Fine. So in the pull and push, right, you have something known as sync. Hit a sync, and I'll say yes, okay. Now what happens is that everything that is there on your remote repository will get synced with your local machine, and the local machine will now say that you know what, you're working on a branch called main. This is where it's telling that you know what, you're working on a branch called main, but I don't want to work on a main branch. I want to work on a branch called XYZ, right? So let's see, where is my branch? Check out and detach, create branch from, no, not this one, no. Let's see, XYZ. Okay, it's not showing out here. Okay, fine. So let me do this. Let me come down to my repository, come down here, and let's clone this branch again. Say open, say okay, open this out. I'll use the same repository. I mean, you can do the same folder out there, or you can create a new folder as such. But to make sure that I, divide things out, I'll just go ahead and, create a different folder. I'll say a feature, and I'll say, okay, fine. This is like feature repo. Let's say feature repo. Okay, let's rename this out. And select this one, and then I'm just cloning the branch basically that I have. So I'll say open. So now if you see, I will be working on a branch called feature repo. Now if basically I do some changes out here for my local machine, let's say this is a developer who's working out here, and let's say he's doing, this is a sample change to test, and I'll just save this out. And now if you see this out, I have something known as a feature repository out here, and I will change this branch, meaning this is known as a checkout branch, guys. Okay, meaning the branch that you're trying to commit on is the main. I will change this branch to something known as a feature, something like button, xyz dot button, and I'll save this. Now I am working on this particular feature branch out here. Same thing that I'll do right now is that I'll basically, okay, fine, I'll stage all my changes. I'll enter a commit message saying this is a feature commit. I'll say enter this commit message and then do a push. So now you are pushing not on the develop, not on the main. You are now pushing basically on something known as a feature branch out there. So now if you look at your feature branch out here, give a refresh to your feature branch, and if you look at this out here, this is a sample change to test. You won't see this on develop. You won't see this on master or the main. So what I did again is just to, the entire repository to get reflected, I went ahead and did a clone. I cloned my feature branch and it reflected all the branches out there. And then I said, okay, fine. I want to make changes onto this particular to this particular feature branch out here. And I put all my changes in the feature. And now I want to send all the changes from my feature to the develop branch. This process of sending the changes from my feature to the develop branch is called a merge. This is called a merge, and a merge is facilitated by something known as a pull request. Pull request, or also known as a PR, meaning you'll have to create a pull request from the feature branch into the develop branch to facilitate a change onto the develop branch, or to facilitate a commit onto the develop branch. And what I'll do is that I'll say, okay, fine, come here and create a pull request, because the change basically that I've done here is like getting reflected. So it's telling what the change is there. So do you want to create a pull request? Or I can directly come here into a button called pull request out here, and I'll say new pull request. I want to basically take changes from my feature to the develop. And now it says, what? There is one commit, which is this. There is one file that is changed, and you can see the differences side by side comparison, that what is not there earlier, what is there now. And you can now say, okay, great. You can push all these changes back again. You can say create, and you have created this out. And now see, it says, what? At least one reviewer must approve this out. In a real world scenario, the technical lead of a particular team will come into something known as a PR, and he will look at these changes. If he feels they are okay, he'll go ahead and he'll approve it out. If he doesn't feel it's okay, he can comment out saying that this is not a desired change. Please work on this. And he can comment this out. Now, if you look at this out, there is a comment onto this particular line. This says, this is not a desired change, please work on it. But if I go ahead and still approve it, my change will go and get merged into the develop. I don't want this to happen. Meaning, if there are some comments out here, unless I resolve those comments, I should not be allowed to go ahead and merge my changes. That is where the second branching policy comes into picture, which is called look for comment resolutions or check for comment resolutions or something like that. This is a required change out here, meaning if there are any comments as such on your pull request, your change should not be facilitated until and unless you resolve all those comments out. Now, if you see, like this particular PR doesn't have that, but when from the future PRs, you will basically have a red option out here telling that the comment hasn't been resolved and all that stuff. And once I said, go ahead and let's say approve this out. Now if you see, this got reflected now. It said, you know what? There is one comment that must be resolved because your branch now got updated, and it said, you know what? I cannot accept this change until and unless you go ahead and let's say resolve this particular comment out. I can just hit on resolve after the developer basically works on this and changes this out to whatever the lead has recommended. It gets resolved, and now see, this is green, and you can complete your merge. And after completing, meaning for completing your merge, very importantly, developers delete their feature branch if no longer needed. Developers go ahead and let's say delete the feature branch to make sure that the repository is clean. The best practice is to delete, but in our case, I'll just leave it in that way. You can also go ahead and delete it out when you want to basically complete your merge, meaning when you hit a complete merge, your changes will now be taken from the let's say your feature branch, and they will be pushed into the develop branch. So now if you look at branches, now if you go into the develop branch, now go to readme.md, this is a sample change. And if you go into the history of this particular file, this is a feature commit, the one that I made it through a pull request, not directly. This was a direct commit, this was through a pull request, and you can only uh, update this branch using a pull request, guys. For a pull request to happen, you need a feature branch as such. This is called a branching policy and a use of branching policy. Guys, any questions out here? Guys, any questions?
Yes.
Anything? Mhm.
So
Yes, Chandra.
this is looks like entirely for related to developers. So is there any involvement for the operations engineers in this?
Yes. When you commit your changes, when you do a lot of changes basically to your ARM templates, your PowerShell scripts, all these things have to be also version controlled, right? That's where we guys come into picture. Meaning the DevOps engineers come into picture, where you would like to basically make all your changes, take all your changes, and let's say put it into inside your repository. Even you will have, let's say, something like branching policies and etc. Because you're not just allowed to go ahead and make change to an existing ARM template, right? So you'll have to make sure that that is thoroughly tested and all that stuff. So that's where these concepts gets implied to all of us as well.
Okay.
So even we basically follow all these things out. Even we basically clone, like that's like one of the daily activities that we kind of do. We clone the branch, make the changes, get it approved by one of our leads, and if I am the lead, I basically go ahead and check for all these the files basically that are coming into picture, and I approve all of them and make sure that the branches are up to date. This is how the daily process really goes into picture. So yes, it gets applied to us as well.
Okay.
Any yeah, any more questions, guys?
But here we should do coding.
No, you don't have to do coding out here. Meaning this is just a process what you need to follow. Meaning this cannot be a code. I mean, this might not be a code, but this might be your changes for ARM templates or PowerShell scripting that you want to basically push out from your local machine to the cloud. So not to coding in exactly out here, Akila. It's like the changes what you want to actually send out into your repository or send out to the cloud. So that change can be any file.
Okay.
Okay, is it confusing? Is it okay until now?
Is there any limit to create the branches?
No, there is no limit as such to create the branches. Like since it's a cloud, there isn't anything as such that you have to limit your branch creation in that way. You can have n number of branches that you have. So does that
Feature
answer your
branch.
question, Kiran? Mhm.
Yes, sir.
Yes, you
Yeah.
can go ahead.
Feature branch will be like individual to every developer.
Exactly. I mean, they will be individual to a developer. Like one developer can have multiple feature branches also, depending upon the work he's doing on, depending upon the feature he's working on. So one multiple can be like there are multiple possibilities there.
Okay. After committing, actually
Mhm.
that reviewer also accepted that one and it's committed to the main branch.
Mhm.
Uh, I mean branch. So
Okay.
it will be like revoke that one means retain that earlier state.
You
If
mean
something if something
okay if
errors are,
something goes wrong,
yeah, yeah,
like if you want to, I mean, you did a change and you want to revert the change back.
yes, yes.
Okay, great question, which is like a really good question. Now, if you go into a pull request, right, and if you look at the completed pull request, this was completed, where I went ahead and let's say, did some change to this particular file. Now it is breaking. You also have an option to revert this entire thing. And it will, what it'll do here is that it will, Azure DevOps will, create a branch for you, like a feature branch for you. It will revert this change, meaning whatever change basically that you did, it will just revert it out and you can raise a new pull request out of it. This pull request will just revert this change. If it's approved, and if I complete this out, and now if you look at the state of your developed branch, this change would have been reverted. If you look at the history, this is a third commit where I reverted this change back out. See, this is a revert where this particular change was deleted. So this is how you can revert changes that are occurring from a pull request. And each and every
So
pull request that you have, right?
yeah, yeah. One more
I was
thing.
telling each.
Like,
Yeah,
sorry,
go ahead,
you
please.
can.
No, I was just telling the state of your pull request, right?
Hmm.
Like you see your pull request getting completed, this will be maintained for 90 days. Each and every pull request will be maintained for 90 days out here. So you can go back to 90 days and then revert your changes out there.
Okay, 90 days history will be maintained here.
90 days history will be maintained. Your pull request history will be maintained for 90.
Okay. So we,
You have,
if we are doing multiple commits also in 90 days, we can revert it back.
we can revert it back again. Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Is there any size limit for this repos?
No, not at all. There isn't any size limit as such. There isn't anything as a size limit because these are all like branches and all that stuff. So you do not have a size limit as such. This is like kind of unlimited out there. Any more questions, guys, on this one?
So there is any chance of git crashes?
Not really. Like I have not at all looked at that. Meaning you can have glitches, like slight amount of glitches out there, but crashing of the same thing, no, not really.
Okay.
Like I
No, I
have
mean
personally not observed. Yeah.
the branch which we created, it may crashes, that kind of
No.
thing.
This is not really kind of virtual machine and etc. This is like altogether different technology what Azure or what Microsoft really runs in the background. So this is like really smooth and crashes is something that I haven't seen at all. Like I've been working with this since the last, let's say about 5 or 6 years now. Till now, till this period, I haven't seen anything like that.
So now we saw in the how to pull, push, and commit from
Hmm.
the Azure,
Hmm.
Azure, Azure DevOps. But
Mhm.
how it works in real world, like I mean, GitHub website. So without Azure, is there any difference or
So without Azure, if you, I mean, without the Azure repos, if you want to, let's say, work with the GitHub repository, let's say you have a GitHub repository, you want to clone, you want to do all these things, you can again use an ID like this. You can use Visual Studio, whatever ID basically that you want to, you can go ahead and do it with that particular ID. So again, GitHub is on the backend running a repository called Git. Azure repos on the backend is also running a repository called Git. So I am looking at the underlying technology. In let's say if you want to basically do it with a command line interface, you can also go ahead and do it with the CMD console out there, like your the CMD basically that comes with your laptop basically by default, or with comes with your Windows operating system by default. You can also do it with that. Or if you're like someone who's coming from, let's say, a Linux world, you can basically do all this clone operations using the Linux terminal. But the underlying concept is the same. Like even if you do from a terminal, you're doing a git clone, you're doing a git push, git pull, everything that you're doing using a command. Here I'm just using an IDE out here. So even if you are coming from an external repository, like let's say a GitHub or a GitHub Enterprise, or let's say a TFS or SVN, all these concepts remain the same.
okay? So in that case, we need to have the GitHub account. From there, we can
Yeah,
we can.
yeah, you can do that. Like if you have a GitHub account, you can I mean you can go ahead and create one account and also try all these operations on top of it.
Okay, so we can see all these things like revert, commit, and push
Yes,
pull.
everything that you have here, you will see there. But the UI will slightly change. Like it's a native Git UI basically that you'll be working with. The UI will slightly change, but the terminology is the same. Like push,
Oh.
pull request, revert, merge, everything is the same.
And what about the approvals? Like we send the push request to the approvers,
Hmm.
so that will be it will be there on the Git portal as well.
Yes, it'll also be there in the Git portal as well. But for that, you need to basically take something like a GitHub Enterprise account, which is like a licensed version of it, where you can add a lot of users and you can maintain the same thing what you do with an Azure repository.
Okay.
Kiran, the data,
Hmm.
backend data of the website, for example, any code we wrote that we are
Hmm.
maintaining here to push, pull, or commit those things. So the data will be stored in this devazure.com, or how it is.
Yes, the data, I mean the code basically for your website, the code that is running on top of your website will be maintained here. Like all the
Okay,
code basically that you'll be
mhm.
doing. Mhm.
And can we
Yeah, go
pull
on.
that for our website from Azure?
Pull that for your website. As in, like I didn't get you that. I
Means
didn't get that point.
can we link for online websites directly?
Yeah, that's where I mean directly, as in like for example, you are creating a web app and you want to do a direct link between your Azure repository and the web app, is it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's where develop. I mean that's where the DevOps practices comes into picture. The CI/CD and all that comes into picture.
Okay.
But you have an
Then
option, like right now they have like given an option something like this, like when you create a website out here, when you're trying to create a web app out here, there is an option called a continuous deployment. Inside deployments, you have an option called continuous deployment. You can enable this out, and any code basically that you do a commit on your GitHub repository, right, will be directly getting pulled by your web application as in when you do a restart. So that is something, an option that is there inside this. If your code is not in a GitHub deployment center and all that stuff. So yes, you have an option, but normally we do a lot of DevOps practices on top of it. Like instead of your code directly sitting in, because one thing that you have to understand here is that your code is still in a raw form. I mean, your code is still in high level language. All this is, let's say, still in a high level language out here. You
mhm.
still have to convert, you still have to make sure that the conversion happens into, let's say, the binary format. for which you need all the DevOps practices basically that comes into picture. But let's say if this is a HTML code where the conversion, you don't have to worry about all this conversion because it is directly understood by a server. There you can do ahead, go ahead and let's say do all this continuous deployment and all that stuff.
Okay.
So that's what it tells. GitHub Actions is automation framework that can test deploy. Whenever there's a new commit is made to your repository, if your code or something like this, it will get reflected onto your web app. That's what it tries to tell out here.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Any further questions with this, guys?
Clone and pull are the same kind of requests, or is there
No,
any
pull
difference?
is, let's say, pull is a specific kind of operation when I create a branch from an existing branch in the cloud. So pull is between a Git repository inside the Git repository. So when I do a new branch out here, and when I say test branch 1, and I say develop is my branch, develop is the source branch, and I create this out, this operation has got called a git pull. So creating a branch out of an existing known as a git pull, but sending your code across from your local machine to a remote git repository is called a git push. This is the main difference between a git pull and a git push.
I mean clone.
Or clone is when you basically, this is your code out here. When you do a clone, you are basically making sure that you're downloading all this code onto your local machine. So an operation between the cloud and the local, from the cloud to the local is a clone. To the local from the, from the local to the cloud is a push. And if you're just like doing, creating a couple of branches out here, it's just called pull.
Okay.
So this is, let's say, you'd like to basically, you just put a diagram out here, something like this. So this is a direction clone. This is a push, and pull is within the, like when you create one branch from the other is when you're doing a git pull. So this is what are the different commands basically that we do have out there, guys. So any questions out here? So very importantly, please don't forget to fill up that form basically that I've given you all. Please fill it out and just send out the request. It'll take like about 2 or 3 days for the request to get processed. And once the request will get processed, right, we'll be at a point where we can use that particular thing out.
So other than this, is there any other commands also like pull, push
They're
command?
actually a lot. They're like sync, fetch, and a couple of things out there. But we'll be mostly using these commands. Like the popular commands are like mostly that you'd be using on a daily basis are these things out, especially when you are coming from a background like a DevOps engineer. Any further questions, guys, that I can take? Okay, so the next class is going to be on Monday, since the Saturday and Sunday we don't have a class. And from on Monday, we are going to talk about something known as branching and merging strategies. Like you have all these branches, what do you do really with this branch? And then we are going to look at, I have a code right now. What do I do with this code? How do I convert my code, let's say on a high level language to a low level language, which is understood by, let's say, the system? And what is, let's say, like I have not covered a lot of branches, like you have a couple of branches more, like a release branch, a hotfix branch, a feature branch, and all that stuff. So we will look into that. We'll start off with something like the branching strategies and merging strategies that we follow, let's say in a real-time project. And then we'll look into the development of our code. Like this is our area. This is our ground. Like the code development and all, that is something that we come into picture. Like to develop all this code and to make sure that we facilitate all this development. This is where we come into picture, guys. So this is very important to how to configure something known as a continuous integration pipeline and also a continuous deployment pipeline and all that stuff. So we'll be looking at a lot of continuous integration, continuous deployment pipelines and all this. But for now, we'll just play around with repositories. And what I want you all to read is something about Azure boards. Like just read what are boards and all. Like just read something about boards. Something about boards out there. Let's say Azure boards in Azure DevOps. You'll have documentations for it. And just read about what boards are, what basically this facilitates you to do. And we'll talk about it when, we basically meet on Monday. So that's it from mine, guys, today. If you all have any questions, I can take, or we can close the session for today. And one quick thing, since that I am on the screen out here, one quick thing out here is that when you download this particular Git for the first time and you're trying to do a clone and all, you'll get an error that you will have to set your credentials, your username and password. The error will be displayed very clearly out here, telling what you need to do. Just take that command out and just type it in here along with the username and password that you want. Or it's not username and password exactly, it's your name and the ID. This is called Git global credentials. This is something that you'll have to do before sending this out and all. But when you first do a push, or when you first basically do a push out there, it will give you an error telling that your global credentials are not set. Please use this particular command to set your global credentials. Just copy those commands out there and set the global credentials out there. But just in case if you get any error out there, let me know. I'll show it to you on a virtual machine on Monday. But just try it out. If you get error, please try googling things out and just try to follow the error basically that you get out there. And if you're still not able to resolve that out, I'll help you out there. So that's it for mine, guys. So have a great weekend ahead and we will meet on Monday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.